Michael Scott, Scotty Man Photo. I thought I'd talk a little bit about some composition tips for landscape photography. And I think it all starts with planning. So, and yes, you could take your camera and you could go out anywhere and probably just no plan, no thoughts, and maybe come out with an award-winning image. That's true. A lot of people are not necessarily into planning, but I think that planning a landscape image yields better results more often. So I'm a big fan of planning. And I'll give you an example. Say you want to go to the lake and take some pictures. So you just pull up, you walk out of your car, bam, you find a great subject. I think you're leaving a lot to chance there. So when I say planning, I mean just think about maybe pulling up Google Earth into an area that you want to go to, and you're kind of scoping out the area for interesting subjects. And maybe you find something and you got an idea of when you want to be there, what time you want to be there. And I think that you're going to get better results doing that. So I think planning is a key element in any composition. And then of course that leads to, what are you shooting? What is the specific subject in mind? So you've got a whole frame in your image. What are you focusing on? What do you want the viewer to look at and say, ah, that's it. Wow, that subject is beautiful. Whether that's a tree, an interesting formation, rock formation, but you've identified a clear subject in your image. And I think that's a big part of a great composition. Well, another important thing to keep in mind is the rule of thirds. I think the rule of thirds is often just taken way out of context. It's not a hard, fast rule that one has to follow. I think it's a guide, and I think it should be used as a guide. And the takeaway for the rule of thirds is, yes, your image can be more interesting if your subject is on one of those third lines. And that does make for a more aesthetically pleasing image. But the important thing is get your subject off center. And I think that's what the takeaway should be. A lot of times people will pull out their camera, they see an interesting subject, wow, that's great, pull out your camera, boom, center frame, and it just lacks interest. It's a dull image. And I think just moving a little bit off center can make the difference between a great image and an okay image. So just something to keep in mind. I think rule of thirds, again, it's not a hard, fast rule. It's a guide, and it should be thought of as a guide. The next thing, of course, is balance. And I think you've got the rule of thirds in mind. You've kind of gotten your subject off center, but you've got everything interesting in your image into one corner. Or maybe it's just kind of grouped. Everything's grouped up together. And what you can do is think about balance. And just by moving around a little bit, you could provide some separation between some of those objects in your image and just kind of balance out your image. And what I mean by balance is not having everything just kind of grouped up together. So by spreading things out in your composition, whether that's cloud formations and water in your image, and then maybe a rock formation and the placement of a tree. But the thing is, you don't have everything grouped up. So I think that is a super important thing to keep in mind when you're out shooting. Well, the next thing, and I think hands down, is probably the most important aspect to any image, and that's lighting. And as a landscape photographer, I say follow the light. And what I mean by that is take your image, but take your image under the right conditions. And so if you go out in the harsh midday sun and you've got the sun overhead and it's beating down on your subject and there's dark shadows, it just might provide a contrast in your image that's not flattering. Whereas if the sun were lower in the sky, sunrise, sunset, the golden hours, those hours of the day where the light is just better and it casts a much better tone of light. The color of the light is just better, warmer or cooler, but you've got options at sunrise and sunset during the golden hours where you don't have those options on the midday sun. So I would say line up your composition, but shoot it at the right time of day. And so you may not want to get up early in the morning. Maybe sunrise is your thing, sunset's your thing. But you know, sometimes sunrise can be better. There's just a kind of a different light at sunrise as opposed to sunset. And also, your subject may require, depending on what you're going for, if you want that warm light kind of glowing on your subject, or maybe reflective light off of a canyon wall, or maybe the reflections off the water. You'll have to time that, and you'll have to either go with the sunrise or the sunset, depending on how you want that to fall out in your image. So those are all elements and aspects of a composition that you have to think of, and I think it's best to think of it, I don't know, it goes back to planning, ahead of time though. The last thing I'd talk about is weather. I think weather is not talked about enough. I think many times photographers kind of, we just grab our camera, we go out and shoot, and we just kind of match the conditions of the weather. And I think, and again, it goes back to planning, but kind of planning out your image might give you a better opportunity to capture the image that you're looking for. For example, if you want to capture a kind of this moody, mystical scene, it might require low clouds, might require fog, and all those things require you to kind of do a little research. So, I mean, you could plan your photography trip, you go out on Saturday, maybe you didn't take weather into consideration. You get out there, you shoot it, you've got this plain sky, and the composition's great, you love it, but there's just something missing to it. Maybe because you're lacking that balance, because you don't have any cloud formations in your image. Whereas if you would have just kind of looked at the weather Sunday, there was high clouds and more color, and so just think about that. Think about weather before you go out and shoot, and I think that'll really bring something extra to your composition. Well, I hope you were able to get something out of this, and maybe something that you can take away and put in your camera bag and pull out and use for later. So I'm going to go ahead and end the video. But hey, if you liked today's video, make sure you hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you thought. And as always, if I don't see you down the road, maybe I'll see you on the trail.